but I'll just get started with a brief introduction and rundown of what's going on today before passing it off to Elle. So my name is Bridget McGregor, and I am the Northern Virginia organizer with Virginia League of Conservation Voters. And first off, we just want to say thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. We know right now is a pretty challenging time for a lot of us for many different reasons. And we just want to take a moment to appreciate you being here for this virtual lobby day training. And then, for also taking this opportunity to look forward and talk about what changes we hope to make throughout the 2021 General Assembly session, and just acknowledge how important it is for the conservation community to be working together on these goals and having all of us on the same page. So the purpose of this meeting is basically to get you all more familiar with how the General Assembly session works and talk about how you can be effectively communicating with your legislators and give you the information that you need to be advocating for some of the most important environmental legislation that is going to be being discussed within the next few weeks at the General Assembly session. And just to give you a sense of the overall agenda that we'll be going over for the next hour or two, we will first be starting off with and he'll begin by walking you through some of the basics of what the General Assembly is, what the timeline looks like for this year, and a few of the things that might be looking a little bit different with much of this year's session taking place virtually and not in person as it usually does. After that, we will have Kim Germain, who is the Virginia Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, who will be discussing what exactly lobbying is, how you will be able to do it easily and effectively, even if this might be your first time taking part in lobbying. And then after that, we'll be hopping back over to Chris, who will be giving us a brief update surrounding the environmental community's legislative priorities this year in regards to clean transportation. So after these presentations, we will then be jumping into a few different breakout rooms where we'll be practicing different lobbying tactics in a comfortable environment and giving you all time to ask some questions once we rejoin after that ends. And then also just to give you a brief idea of what VA-LCV is, we essentially work as the statewide political voice for conservation in Virginia. We have 3 different pieces to our organization, and one is the C3 side, which does more voter engagement, lawmaker education, and organizing. Then we have the C4 side, which does lobbying, advocacy, and endorses candidates. And we also have a PAC as well, which we use heavily in state elections to financially support different candidates that we endorse. Then we also come out with an annual conservation scorecard, which helps to guide us in those endorsements. And that is basically a rundown talking about which way your legislator voted, if they voted for good policies on the environment and things like that. So with that being said, I will then pass it off to Elle to give a brief introduction for herself.
Hi, all. I'm so happy to see all of your faces. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time in the middle of your day. My name is Elle de la Cancella. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Central Virginia organizer for the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And so a little bit about CCAN is we take a 2-pronged approach to how we fight climate change. The first is that we work to build grassroots power in the DMV area, so DC, Maryland, Virginia, particularly focusing on communities that have been affected by extractive industries. And then secondly, we mobilize to push for strong legislation that ensures climate stability by hosting events like these and getting folks like you to come out and help fight for us for change that we know that we need on our statewide level. And now just a few housekeeping items. I mentioned it at the beginning, but this event is going to be recorded. So if that makes you uncomfortable, please feel free to turn off your video. But we just want to be able to ensure that we disseminate all of this information afterwards for those who couldn't make it. And then to aid kind of with the Zoom world that we live in now, I'm going to ask you all to keep yourselves on mute. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will have a question and answer portion at the end of the event. And without further ado, I believe I'm going to turn it over to Chris to kick us off. And thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you, Ella, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Leyen, the Senior Policy Manager for the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. As Bridget said, we We take the priorities that are created from the environmental community in Virginia generally, and we go to the General Assembly and work through relationships and through policy expertise to advance those priorities. I'm the senior policy manager, and the other member of our team who you may be hearing from is our executive director. He and I work together to work to advance those legislative priorities. As the slides come up on the screen, we're going to be going over what the General Assembly is, give you sort of an idea of what the session timing is going to look like this session. And the answer that I give you this year is going to be completely different from the answer you would get from any other year. We'll touch briefly on the process, and timing of the actual legislation, and then we'll give you a little bit of information on how to follow along with the General Assembly session, because it's A, virtual, and B, not that easy to do if it's not virtual anyway. If you want to pass along the next one here. So the General Assembly is bicameral, just like the Congress is at the federal level. Unlike Congress at the federal level, every state doesn't get two senators because it's just one state. They just represent slightly larger districts. The House is 100 members that represent roughly 85,000 folks, and the Senate are 40 members that represent roughly 200,000. That, of course, is all going to change shortly with the census as well. Other distinction is that in the House they serve 2 terms, but in the Senate they only serve 4, so we don't have those 6-year terms. And everyone comes up for election in the Senate during the same year. These elections are what are called off year elections. So the House of Delegates and the statewide folks are all going to come up for election in the off year, which is coming up this November. That's the year immediately following a presidential year. That's when your governor, attorney general, and the lieutenant governor all come up for election, as well as the House of Delegates. And then the senators will come up for re-election in 2023. So in a lot of ways, Virginia is going to be the only show in town, sort of at the national level, and it's one of the things that makes Virginia a political leader on a lot of these issues, as well as the makeup of the state, having various geography or geographical markers, suburban, urban, and rural constituencies, as well as lots of different industries. It makes it a good bellwether for the rest of the nation. And that's going to be part of why our work to advance a clean transportation agenda is so important, because what we're able to do here in Virginia sets the tone for the rest of the country in a way that other states that are taking the lead on this issue, that are such as like New York or California or Washington, or won't necessarily, it won't necessarily create the playbook that Virginia does for the rest of the country. That's it sort of for the overview. You want to bounce to the next one here? So the General Assembly session is typically either 60 days, which is when we deal with roughly around 3,000 pieces of legislation, and the biennial budget. Virginia passes its budget every 2 years, and then during the second year, which is what we're doing this year, during the short session, we will just basically true up the budget, because we pass it based on projections. And then as we get the revenue estimates, it changes what the budget looks like. If we have more money, we will allocate it to different programs. If we have less money, they will allocate it to, they'll figure out where to save, and that can be more painful. As it says on the slide, typically we get this extended to, it says 45, it's always 46, which is a weird number on it, but this is it's done as a sort of general courtesy. For the last 50 years, it's been this has been the norm. And this year, following the 2020 session and the special session that we had last year, the Republican Party essentially said, we want to do this in 30 days. There's a lot of potential reasons that have been given for that, but the one thing that it means for us this year is that we have a lot of uncertainty in terms of timing, because the infrastructure that was built around how the committees work when budgetary information comes out, and just the general rhythm of how things get done, is going to be disrupted by the fact that this year we're going in for 30 days, and then we will likely, it is the expectation that we're going to have a special session that starts on February 11th and with an indeterminate end date. There's a lot of concern about this from just a process standpoint, because without a procedural resolution, it is possible that we may end up with fuzzy dates around when when the business is going to get wrapped up, which sort of resulted in the 84-day session last year. The special session that dealt with the pandemic and with criminal justice reform in major ways. So that's what we're dealing with now. The money's gonna, a big date to keep in mind, and something that's not mentioned here is that all the legislation has to be, is considered in its House of introduction. So if I'm a House member, everything I do has to get through the House first. And if I'm a senator, I have to get everything through the Senate. Then the session goes through this magical phase called crossover, which is essentially when everyone works like crazy for a couple of days, because of course with a deadline, you're getting everything done at the 11th hour. And then we sort of collectively take a breath as the different bills are reassigned to committees in the other body, and the House considers all the Senate bills, and the Senate takes up the House bills. This is actually going to occur on February 6th. So with the session scheduled to wrap up shortly thereafter, basically saying that we know the House and Senate aren't going to get all their work done, and we're going to have to come back for a special. And this is gonna make it interesting, but it doesn't change a lot of the basics about lobbying that we're going to run through soon. So jump to the next one here. Then we come back for this thing called reconvene, which happens in April. Basically, the legislation that gets passed by the General Assembly is sent over to the governor, where his policy staff looks at it. They have, it's serves sort of two purposes. One, it allows the governor's staff to make recommendations to legislation that have substantive budget impacts, that may tackle policy in a different way than the governor would be willing to sign. He'll send those recommendations. He'll veto legislation that he doesn't like. When you have the same party in control, that a lot of the back and forth is on amendments and on, rather than what we saw when Terry McAuliffe was governor and you had a Republican-controlled legislature. He used to brag about having 100 or something vetoes, which is the dynamic and what that time is used for coming up to April, when you have different leadership in the legislature than the governor's mansion. So we will. There's a window also to make sure that T's are dotted. T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and we make sure that all the budgetary implications are considered appropriately. Then as it says, most bills come due the first day of July, unless they get an emergency clause placed on them. But when that happens, it's because legislation is basically so timely and necessary that you get a super majority to support the bill. There are, with a lot of policies that have big fiscal impacts, or that require implementation and sort of a lead up to it, you're going to see sort of like you saw last session with the minimum wage legislation, you see a delayed enactment date. Often this can be January 1st of the following year or the following July, just to allow agencies or industries to catch up with the change in the legislation. So we talked about this piece a little bit earlier. I wish I could tell you more about what everything's going to look like, but if I could do that, then I would be the only one in Virginia, I think, at this point. So the governor has come out and said that he will extend the session to a special, and given the committee architecture, so the timelines that the both the House and the Senate have set for actually accomplishing their legislative goals, all things point towards the extension of the session. Yeah, the lawmakers did not vote to extend the session yesterday. It was approved by the Senate, voted down in the House along party lines, and then the Senate came back and approved a procedural resolution that lined up with the House and set it at 30 days. They also adopted things that will put in place like mask mandates and rules regarding contact. And fortunately, the legislators will be getting the COVID-19 vaccine, so that we can hopefully prevent situations like that which happened with Senator Chafin, given that we're going to have a lot of susceptible folks all meeting together in person in the Senate. The House is all meeting just like we are in the comfort of your living room, which is quite an interesting and fun way to conduct the legislative session. I miss getting to go into the Pocahontas building and see people hanging out starting at 7 in the morning, but it is much nicer to just be able to flip on a screen. But it does impact access and advocacy, which Elle is going to go through in just a little bit here. So quick thing through here, how bills are created. You come up with a bill. We at LCV hear about something and work on a bill, or one of Virginia Conservation Networks, which is an organization that we are a part of, has 137 members. And they will be bringing ideas from around the Commonwealth, from experts, from advocacy groups, from people who deal primarily with, like CCAN, who deal with people affected by extractive industries, or people who have other sorts of specialties. And then those get worked on. Essentially, you can think of the other 9 months out of the year that we are not working through the legislature as the off season, and everyone is. Forgive the sports metaphor, they're sort of in training camp and working, getting everything shopped through groups like LCV, working them through their community, and legislators are holding listening sessions to try and figure out what everything's going to look like. Because we only have 45 days or 60 days at the most, by the time we get to session, you're not creating legislation, you are making edits and approving what has been worked on throughout the year. The bills get reviewed by committee. In the House, there's 100 of them. So rather than having every bill come before committees, they often run into subcommittees. The Senate, with the exception of the Finance Committee, really doesn't rely on subcommittees as much. And in subcommittees, you tend to have more frank and honestly less, in a lot of ways until last year, less transparent discussions, because they weren't publicized and votes weren't taken. But then when they get to committee, you can view those online, which is going to be reviewed later, and you can also watch the floor session happen which is televised as well. Okay, jump next one. Yep. So we talked a little bit about this. After a bill goes through committee, and then through the floor, where it's voted on by either the House or the Senate, it's then kicked over to the kicked over to the other body. It's reviewed by the governor, and then it's either accepted or rejected. And ta-da, we've got sausage. I mean, a law. So yeah, if we have yes, please drop questions. As Roz is reminding everyone in the chat, I am happy to sort of give insights as they are available, or claim ignorance when it's not. All right, what else do we got today? I think that may be everything for me before Elle goes into lobbying basics.
There's still just a few more. These are kind of like for you to answer. Sorry.
Oh no, let's go. Let's go. We can keep jumping here. Okay, so the bill limits in the Senate. You got bill limit of 12. 12 is the only number you care about now. They can have no more. They can definitely have less. And a lot of times the chair of finance, Janet Howell, never really carries any bills other than the budget. The House has 7. They were only allowed to, the Senate was only allowed to have 8 bills, what's called pre-filed. So now if anyone, no matter how good your idea is now, if a senator has used up all their 12 bills, they cannot introduce that. If they've introduced 8 bills, they can introduce up to 4 bills, and those, I believe, have to all be submitted by next Friday. Though, because you've taken a body that is used to introducing, something like 15 to 20 bills a senator, and you've got some folks who introduced up to 60. Okay, really, it's Scott Servo. There's one guy who introduces up to 60, but they condensing those all down to 12 has meant that really we've seen a lot of streamlined agendas, a lot of very focused agendas, but we've also seen a lot of really good ideas that aren't going to get considered this year just because of the fatigue of an incredibly successful yet trying 2020 session, followed by a pandemic, followed by an 84-day special session that just wrapped up, and also because really there was not a great idea of how the remote session was going to be conducted until yesterday. And so Senate, like we said, is in person at the Science Center. They are not meeting with their aides, like, at all. The only way that they can exchange papers is to go outside the Science Center and, just like picking up your Uber Eats, as we've been doing for the last 9 months, they pick up their legislative finder and get updates. But everyone is in silos, and that matters immensely for when we try to communicate with folks. Bridget, give me like a 5 or like a 2-minute timer, or let me know how egregiously I am stepping on people's time.
You're fine.
So the senators will meet in the Science Center. They'll meet in person. This is just like what they did during the special session, and so they're not going to have access, but they are all down in Richmond. They are maintaining the standard schedule that they typically do. There's you can view this at the General Assembly website, and maybe I'll give Ross some homework, see if he knows where it is. But if you want to post, there's a PDF of the committee schedule that gives you an idea of when they are all when they're going to be in session. The House has modified their session to basically consist of 2-hour blocks starting at 7 in the morning, which is where I was this morning in transportation sub, and so they work everything out in 2-hour blocks leading up to a 4 p.m. floor session. The Senate is going to go into floor session at noon. Typically, this is pretty boring because bills not generally. That's not a general statement. For the first couple of days, it's pretty slow on the floor because bills have to get through committee, so there's nothing for them to debate in the chamber or in the virtual chamber here. For a little bit, and they also have to go through 3 hearings. One is when the bill gets introduced. The reading is typically waived, and then they have a second hearing where The Senate considers amendments on the second hearing. I believe the House considers them on the third. And then the third hearing is where the bill comes up for passage. And those have to happen on different days, which is nice for us in the advocacy community because it gives us a chance to see things coming. 72 hours notice, but we still see it coming. How the lawmakers will discuss bills is incredibly different. So whereas we would be having lobby days and we would be calling into office, I'm going to run through a couple of things here. In person, typically we would have paid lobbyists like myself who are registered with the state, running around the Pocahontas building, passing around one-pagers and having short informal conversations with staff and with members to advance priorities. This would be this work supplements the work that grassroots advocates do, which is to set up scheduled meetings with staff and with members, or to go in through office hours and have face-to-face sit-downs and really share their stories and the personal reasons for members to vote on legislation. And these personal reasons, as Elle's going to talk about, are just they resonate so much better than any numbers that I can put in front of them. And so that's why, in a lot of ways, why the work you guys are doing are very important. And just like the thing that is not going to change is if you are not a constituent of a legislator, they are not snubbing you when they say, like, I can't meet with you, I can only have staff meet with you, or we only meet with constituents. It is a function of the frequency of meetings that they have to have in the work that they're trying to do, that they want to make sure to do their best to represent the people who they were elected to serve. And that obligation is one that, for better or for worse from an environmental perspective, that the members take incredibly seriously. So doing the work to get constituents in front of their representatives is absolutely essential. So thank you all for joining us from around the state. The discussion of the bills in the virtual, so calling in is going to be very tricky this year. You can call into district offices. That is probably the best line because those are going to be the numbers that forward to Richmond, and they're going to be the numbers that forward to the aides' cell phones in certain cases. I can verify this because I was doing it for a year and I was getting blown up all the time. And then the other thing is emails, and these are going to be processed through typically through interns and through staff. They will view form letters. They will take individual letters. They will draft constituent responses that are reviewed and discussed with the member. So correspondence is a great way to communicate with legislators because they have to put enough thought into what you write to them to actually put something back, and it helps solidify their position. It helps us know what their position is, and so that's also a really useful tool. In a virtual environment, a lot of the conversations that would happen quickly are gone. Really, it's replaced by text messages, quick phone calls, but we are taking action that is much more focused and deliberate because we understand that our touches are going to be so much fewer. A lot of times, the only advocates on things are going to be, the only advocates for legislation are going to be the handful of folks who manage to make it onto the Zoom calls without having technical difficulties, and the legislators themselves in the room. So making sure that our champions in the legislature are armed with the points that that advocates need them to be emphasizing is essential, because so often the only asides and the only frank conversations or formal conversations on video are actually happening just between the legislators themselves this year more than really any other year. How do you lobby virtually? You follow Bridget's steps and her incredible work to get Zoom committee meetings with, with members and with staff, and you take those 15 minutes and you, in an incredibly focused way, share the really share the story that's behind what you're doing. why you support this piece of legislation or why you oppose something, and its impact on you, because that's going to be the piece that matters. They're going to hear about what the bill does through memos that organizations like LCV puts out, through one-pagers and all these things that their staff is compiling for them. But hearing about why something is important to people who live in their district is going to be, is a story that can be told via Zoom, and that will resonate with people, because it's not a perfect substitute for face-to-face, but it does matter. Yeah, I think that's it for this piece. Staying informed, news outlets. I'm going to put a plug. Roz, put a link to vpap.org. That's the Virginia Public Access Project. They do a daily digest of the news, and it is absolutely fantastic. It covers everything from the Richmond Times-Dispatch and also these are great newspapers as well. The Virginian Pilot. There's I think it's Roanoke Times. I am blanking on the one out there. There's a couple of Nova. There are a couple of Nova outlets. But this is all compiled through the Public Access Project, which also gives information about who your legislator is, the area they represent, where the people who contribute to them financially come from, their election history, and so it's just incredible resource. The floor live streams can be found through the General Assembly website. Roz put that in the chat too. And sorry, I don't know if send me a chat that says, "Hey Chris, you're being bossy." Put it in the chat yourself if you want me to look something up later, okay? And so go through those. The Senate and the House have committee and floor live streams. Really, if you want to see why a bill ended up the way it did, go to the committee. That is going to be key, because that's where you're going to hear the fully fleshed out arguments for and against the bills, and you're going to see why they started to why the bill started to unfold the way it did or didn't. The way that you figure out whether you should go to a committee on a bill is you use the legislative information system, which will also, I believe, get linked in the chat as well. That is, you can view bills by bill number, you can view them by member, and you can view committee dockets to see when a bill came up. What I always like to do is, when you click on a bill, it'll bring up the bill history. Go to the committee hearing that has and if it has a contested vote, you can look up on the General Assembly's website, you can look up the video for that committee hearing. In the House, they're much more technologically savvy, so you can look at like little timestamps that will bring you right to the bill they're discussing. In the Senate, you just click on it until you see, like on the screenshot itself, the bill number you're looking for. But yeah, that's how you can use the legislative information system to track bills. They have a tool for free, or they have a paid subscription that you can sign up for, called Lobbyist in a Box. The free version allows you to track 5 pieces of legislation. You can get updates about what the latest action was that was taken on a bill, or on you can see the bill history. But it's incredibly useful, publicly available tool for tracking legislation, although the user interface is pretty rough. That's the other thing is we give weekly legislative updates. Mike Town hosts calls that where he will give updates. If you're signed up to receive email updates, those are going to come through our fantastic outreach team. We have Lee Francis, our deputy director, and Michaela Misrazi, who is our social media director, are really working to and communications. They're working to make sure that they can keep you informed on legislation that we're viewing as a priority as well. And then I don't know what we signed up for in this last bullet with LCV and CCAN staff. But we can be reached if necessary in a way that I'm sure someone will tell you later on in the slide. Okay, what else we got?
That is it for you, Chris. So thank you for covering all that for us. And for that last bullet, just if you do need anything or you'd like any updates, feel free to reach out to any CCAN or LCB staff member. Our contact information, I'm sure, will be dropped in the chat as well. And it's also on the beginning of these slides, but you may have missed that. So we'll bump it for you. And if we'd like to take a moment to do some questions for Chris, I haven't looked at the chat box, or we can, hold off until the end. So I don't know if there.
I'm happy to jump us back on to push Q&A back to the policy one. I'll try to run through the bills really quickly to save some time there.
Good, and then we will move right on to Kim in that case.
Awesome, thanks, Bridget. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right, perfect. So my name is Kim Germain, and I'm the Virginia Director for CCAN and CCAN Action Fund. I just want to thank you all for joining us today. Before we start, by show of hand or in the chat, let me know if you have lobbied before. All right, so we have a lot of folks who looks like about half and half as I'm scrolling through here of folks that have lobbied and then those that haven't. So hopefully this will give you some new information on how to lobby in this virtual setting. And for those of you that haven't, just give you a little bit of an introduction to lobbying. So let's talk about lobbying. What is it? Lobbying is just a straightforward way to affect change by communicating with decision makers. It's impossible for legislators and their staff to be subject matter experts on all of the issues that come across their desks. This is especially pertinent here in Virginia because we do have a citizen legislator. So a lot of the legislators have day jobs, and they take their personal time to advocate and represent Virginians. Because of that, they rely on others to educate them and provide them with information. Some of this is done by paid lobbyists, but we also need to ensure that everyday citizens and advocates are placed in front of legislators and are meeting with these folks regularly. The more voices that there are to champion a collective cause, the more effective we can be. Let's go on to the next slide. So, if you're new to lobbying, the task can sometimes be daunting, but the first step is to find out who represents you and how to contact them. Luckily, and I'm going to try to drop this in the chat, the General Assembly has a quick and easy tool to give you that information. I'm going to drop this here. Sorry about this. We'll drop that link now and give you just a few minutes to enter your home address. When you're done, drop the name of your legislator in this chat. So what we're going to do is just give you a second to click that link if you're on your computer or somewhere where you can do that. If not, you can follow that link later on. Once you have that information, make sure to copy and paste it for later use or add them to your contact list. Especially given this virtual setting, this information will be vital for you to schedule meetings or lobby legislators via email. Awesome, so we have a couple of folks entering their representatives in the chat. Continue to do that. Just make sure that you're really using that tool. It's new and super helpful. It gives you legislator phone numbers. It also gives you a link to their email addresses. Thanks, everybody. This year, we can go on to the next slide, Bridget. This year, we're getting creative when it comes to lobbying strategies. Here are a few of the top strategies for lobbying. In normal times, you can, of course, reach out by email or phone and ask to schedule an in-person meeting. Most legislators have schedulers or staff that can assist you with that process. Obviously, that's not the case this year, but it's something that you can do moving forward. You can reach out directly to your representative and schedule a time to come to Richmond during session and lobby them directly. Likewise, you can follow the same steps to request a Zoom meeting. Reach out by email or phone, identify yourself as a constituent, and state when you are available and what you would like to talk about. This is just one of the few benefits of COVID, is that with everything being virtual, we have a new tool to speak to our representatives and make our voices heard. I know of very few people that were taking constituents meetings virtually, but now we can. So that's something that will definitely work to your benefit as you lobby. You can also simply call the number listed and state that you would like your representative to support or oppose a piece of legislation. They will take down your information and update their system with your position. If you can, be sure to state the bill number. It makes it a lot easier for them to kind of inventory what they're hearing from constituents. You can follow the same protocol and send an email with your position. All right. And just remember that all of this is about relationship building. Make sure that you're following up, make sure that you're being kind, make sure that you're staying connected in multiple ways. You can try social media, which we're going to talk a little bit about here. Make sure that you're emailing, and if you can, taking the opportunity to meet them virtually. In this digital age and during this virtual session, legislators are finding new and creative ways to engage with constituents. Social media is a quick and easy way to connect. I saw a number of legislators yesterday putting their agendas on social media, talking about bills they introduced, and giving constituents phone numbers or emails to connect with them directly. So if you use social media, especially Twitter, a lot of legislators are active there. So just make sure that you reach out there. It's a quick and easy way to kind of build that initial connection. All right. And the next slide. So this is just an example of a meeting request email. Be concise, state your name, location, and if you're lobbying with a group, state that affiliation as well. If others are joining you for the meeting, be sure to state that in the email. Now I'll just let you all look at this. All right. Oh, this is a little out of order. Bridget, can you skip just one ahead? I think one or two ahead. One more. Uh-oh, another one. Oh. No, I think there's a slide missing. Sorry about this, folks. There's a lobbying tips and tricks slide.
I don't see it on here.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about it just from.
Yeah, no problem. I will just go over this for you all folks. Sorry about that. So here are just some tips and tricks for lobbying. Once you have a meeting secure via that email or phone contact, here's some tips. As always, be sure to state the bill number so legislators know what you're referring to. Always reiterate. Yes, Michael, we will be recording and we'll be sharing later. All right. So always be sure to reiterate that you're a constituent. Legislators have a ton of meeting requests from paid lobbyists and advocates, but they prioritize hearing from the folks they represent. Second tip is just be prepared. Make sure that you feel like you can talk to the bills effectively. Do your research on how legislators have voted on related issues in the past, so you have kind of an understanding of what you're going into, and be able to combine those aspects with your personal story. Be concise and mindful of your time. This goes for all forms of communication, whether it be email or direct lobbying. This is a short session with a robust agenda, and we want to be impactful, but also respectful of the work that they have to do. And then the most important thing, which Chris mentioned a little bit earlier, is to remember to tell your story. It might be awkward or uncomfortable at first, but legislators want to understand how bills will impact everyday people. Legislators will hear from us, they'll hear from paid lobbyists with talking points and statistics, and they'll see those a number of times. But you have the greatest impact if you can tell a story about how a piece of legislation will affect you, your family, and neighbors just like you throughout their district. For example, when it comes to clean car standards, if you have been EV shopping and had a difficult time finding an electric vehicle, or if you live close to a roadway that is highly trafficked and it has impacted the health of yourself or those in your family, those stories are a lot more impactful than the talking points. We want to make sure that we know what we're talking about, that we do stick to kind of that messaging, but we also know that legislators like to hear about your personal stories. And then next, have a clear ask. Always start and close lobbying meetings with a clear request stating how you want a legislator to vote. When you're talking about your personal story, when you're introducing yourself, it can get a little hazy and you may forget to do this, but it really does help, like I said earlier, legislators and their staff document your response if you're able to state the bill number and also have a clear ask. If you want them to support the bill, let them know that. If you want them to oppose the bill, let them know that as well. And then finally, follow up. Once you're done, be sure to send a follow-up email thanking your legislator and restating your position. Also, just keep in communication. We don't want this to be a one-off opportunity for lobbying. We want you to be able to build that connection with your legislator through lobbying, through social media contact, and then when things go a little bit back to normal at district offices as well. So make sure to use that tool and follow up as well. Right. Another simple way to state your position on a bill is to provide testimony during committee hearings. So this is another one of those small benefits of COVID. Before, you would have to drive to Richmond during session, go through security in order to get in the building. And oftentimes those committee hearings got super packed super early, which a lot of you probably know. And sometimes you had to stay for hours. But now you can do that virtually. To do so virtually, you can follow these links that I'm going to drop in just a second. Once a certain bill is assigned to committee, it will appear at these links and you will have the option to submit written comments or register to speak. If you have the time, I would do both. Like I said, written comments are provided to committee members, so they're great. But if you have the time to sit and speak, you can also do that. We've also heard that even if if they do not take testimony during committee in this virtual setting, they'll be using polls to kind of gauge how folks in the committee hearings want them to vote. So that is a new tool that will be available this year. For both, you want to be clear and concise. You will have a very short amount of time. If you're speaking, you will address the group as Mr. or Madam Chair and members of the committee. State your name and try to keep it under 30 seconds. Talk about your interest, personal connection to the issue at hand, and how you would like them to vote on a bill number. Before we go to the next slide, I am going to drop those links to register to speak in committee or provide written comments. All right, Bridget, on to the next slide, please. So here is an example of what your testimony will look like. I'll let you all read over this. I will not bore you with my voice any longer. But just like I said, address the committee, state your name, the bill number, your personal stake, and then how you would like them to vote. All right, Bridget. And then finally, just remember to be kind. throughout the entire process, be cordial and polite. There will certainly come a time when you disagree with your legislator, but there will also be a lot of times when you do agree. Remember that these are people that you're speaking to. Their staff are often relatively young. Their staff are kind of taking communications from people throughout their district. They're monitoring right now in this virtual setting phones, they're monitoring emails, they're also looking at social media, and a lot of times watching that testimony virtually. The people that answer the phones and emails are sometimes interns or volunteers as well, so keep that in mind. Kind of goes a long way in writing and in person. And that is all for me, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kim, for all of that on different effective lobbying tactics. And now we're going to bring it back to Chris, and he's going to cover some of the clean transportation priorities that we'll be talking about this session. I think you're still on mute, Chris.
I guess that's reasonable. Hey, y'all, we're going to talk a little bit about transportation electrification this year. So last year, the environmental community was able to make major progress in addressing our energy sector through the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which helped switch off fossil fuels, increase energy efficiency, and make our grid more resilient. That tackled 29% of Virginia's carbon problem. A full 48%, nearly half of Virginia's carbon pollution comes from the transportation sector. And tackling this is going to require a lot of different approaches, from changing how and how far we travel to changing where and how we live and design our communities. There are going to be efforts on rail and all these other, and on just what communities look like, and those. But the first big chunk that we want to try to tackle is transportation electrification, because of that half of Virginia's carbon pollution that comes from transportation, 70% of that is from personal vehicles. If we are able to decarbonize that, we make huge strides in both in Virginia's carbon footprint, as well as the health of the air that folks breathe. And this is important for low-income communities and communities of color who often find their communities to be the ones near highways or more predominantly impacted by your dirty fuel emissions. If there's a key priority of the environmental community that stretches across the sectors, I would say that this is that major effort. In order to advance electric vehicles, we're tackling this in 3 pieces. Step 1, this is the horse before the cart, is setting a goal, setting a clean car standard, which allows Virginia to adopt standards for low emission vehicles and zero emission that say we want to improve gas mileage of gasoline powered vehicles, and zero emission fleet standards which say a certain percentage of your vehicles must be zero emission. Those vehicles are not on the lot in Virginia. We have to travel to Maryland to get those. And we know that 8% of Virginians want to have their next car be an electric vehicle, and that over 30% are strongly considering making their next car an electric vehicle. But in order to meet that demand, our Virginians have to go out of state to across the Potomac to places like Maryland, who have clean car standards in place and have the vehicles available on the lot. Is the 2 other pieces that we need are infrastructure and incentives. We will get to those, but I want to circle back because while industry might say we need to have infrastructure and incentives in place. We know in order to sell more electric vehicles, we know that having a standard that we can hold people accountable to and work to get everyone to the table and working together is an important key component of of making sure that when we make these investments at the state, that that we have assurances that the car manufacturing industry is going to work with us to make sure that Virginians have access to cleaner transportation. That's Clean Car Standards. It is HB 1965 being carried by Delegate Bagby. And I'm happy to speak more on this. Kim is incredibly knowledgeable about this as well. So if I missed or misstated anything, please feel free to jump in and adjust that, as well as to share the arguments that you found that are really effective. The other piece of this is EV infrastructure, and Delegate Sullivan is going to be carrying a bill to take a look at how we implement further EV infrastructure. There are other pieces to infrastructure that are happening now, such as the settlement money for VW's Dieselgate is currently being used to expand charging stations. And we know that within a few years, we will have charging stations within 30 miles of the vast majority of Virginians, and with people having the ability to charge their cars at home. Everyone who lives in a house or in a building that has been outfitted for electric charging stations has basically a pump at their home. So that infrastructure bill will be coming down the pipe. Please take a look at it, monitoring through LAS. And the other piece is to explicitly get transportation electrification to be listed as a part of Virginia's energy plan. This is important as we set goals to make sure that the state itself is prepared, that is prepared and is investing in the infrastructure that's necessary for electric vehicles to take hold, because we know that the concerns surrounding electric vehicles are availability, the cost, the upfront cost, because we know we already have a winning argument when it comes to life cycle costs, and addressing the infrastructure and sort of getting and their education, people understanding that the charging infrastructure is already in a lot of instances at your house, and thinking about how they travel. The other, so those are sort of the three pieces. Clean Car Standard is absolutely essential that that you let your legislators know that you want to have access to these vehicles, and you want us leading the way and joining that standard. Infrastructure and incentives are going to be important components to that. A little bit about the on the hood, as the auto dealers call it, incentives. Delegate Reed is carrying a bill that gives $2,000 to on the hood to apply to new, used, and leased vehicles. If you have a low or moderate income, you're eligible for up to $4,500. In addition to establishing this rebate, there's going to be an advisory council or committee established on environmental justice that will make sure that these standards or that these rebates are being applied as equitably as possible. And so those are the three pieces. The main piece, the most important thing to go to your legislators about is to let them know that you support advanced clean car standards that Delegate Bagby is carrying, HB 1965. The other pieces that I just want to let you know about, but that I'm not going to spend too much time on, are the Transit Modernization Study by Delegate McQuinn. And this is important because this is going to shape our understanding of why our transit infrastructure that exists, where it can be improved to adequately serve more Virginians, and also where we need to make investments in our transit infrastructure and fleets so that it does become something that is more widely used in Virginia. A couple of other pieces that we're looking at over here in this space are Delegate Hurst has legislation to extend passenger rail to Christiansburg, and this is a governor's administration priority, and it's also accompanied by $50 million to help make this a reality. Delegate Reed has legislation to help EV trucks be available for use in Virginia, and this is done by taking the weight limit of trucks and allowing electric trucks only to weigh an additional 1,200 pounds. No, excuse me, not 1,200, 2,000 pounds. And the reason for this 2,000 pound, and this 2,000 pounds has to be linked to the power center. So it's not just going to make all trucks heavier. It's specifically for the heavier weight of batteries to move goods in trucks. And Delegate Samir is going to be carrying legislation to help remove or waive parking requirements within transit corridors. And Delegate Keem is carrying a bill, which for those of you who've been lobbying before on some of these issues may sound familiar. This is a bill to implement a tax on red dye diesel. That's diesel that's used in construction, and apply that tax to fund electric school buses, the electrification of school buses. This is important because when our children take the bus to school, they are often exposed to high levels of diesel fumes, and it's less healthy. It is also an incredible opportunity for us to take buses that spend 90% of their day sitting in a lot and use those as battery storage to help make our grid more resilient. So the important thing to remember on this study is that red dye diesel, while it is used in both construction and farming equipment, the farmers are going to get a tax refund, so it should not impact the economic well-being of Virginia's farmers. That's pretty much the transportation landscape. Just circling back again, the keystone of our efforts this year is establishing a clean car standard. This is 8% electric vehicles on the lot in 2025, and this is the tool. This is our guiding light to make sure that we are coming together with the state, or with the Commonwealth, and with our localities, and with our industries to get in place the infrastructure and the incentives that are going to be needed to help expand electric vehicles in the Commonwealth as well. That's it, or that's my pitch, I guess. And I'm happy to take any questions. I know I flew through the sort of what the General Assembly looks like and pretty quickly, and this as well. So I'm happy to field what I'm looking in the chat to be a bunch of them. Okay, great. So starting with Bridget, let me know if we want to do these in a facilitated fashion or whether you just want me to run through the chat or raise hands.
I think that if we want to pull a few questions from the chat now that, might be more specifically aimed at maybe these bills or General Assembly members, that would be good. And then we'll be doing a Q&A after we go into breakout rooms also. Feel free to jump in, anyone else is helping me with this.
I think maybe we hold the chat questions until the Q&A as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, so we will jump ahead, and Lauren here is going to facilitate getting us into a few different breakout rooms where we'll be going over those practice lobbying sessions. So I'll let her take it from here.
I would say, wait, I was going to say, I probably have to, I don't think I'm going to have time to stay for the breakout pieces. I'm happy to Zoom back in if you want to send me a text or just leave myself on mute here.
I think that should be fine. If you need to hop off, then I'll just shoot you a text when we get into the Q&A.
Okay, perfect. Everyone, I appreciate your time, and I really, and thank you all for coming out, because your stories are the ones that are going to sell it. It's not going to be just the conversations that Kim and I are having out in the General Assembly. So thank you all.
Thank you for being here, Chris, and I'll shoot you a text.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much to our wonderful speakers for getting us kind of centered on what session is, what it is normally, what it will be this year, and how you can make your voice heard as a lobbyist, both during non-COVID times and during COVID times. So now we're going to take a moment to practice this. So our great LCV and CCAN staff members are going to be facilitators in each of our breakout rooms. They will be role-playing as legislators in kind of a variety of different ways, including kind of different degrees of needing to be convinced or not. So they have their guide as far as that. I'm going to take a moment and just go ahead and filter y'all into those breakout rooms and make sure you have your facilitators assigned to each of you. The breakout rooms are going to last for about 20 minutes. I'll remain in the main room and then I'll pull y'all back in and we'll debrief from that and then go straight into our Q&A. Also, if you y'all should have received your e-packet of Clean Cars resources. If you want to pop that open as well, that would be great. And I think I am going to go ahead and ask Kim, if you wouldn't mind hanging back and being a facilitator, that would be awesome. So give me just 1 second. Feel free to take a drink of water. And moving to group 1, just making sure everybody has a facilitator. And it looks like we do, and y'all are good to go. So I'm sending you over there now. Nice to see you again. Thank you for those that stayed and didn't sneak off through the Zoom black hole. We always really appreciate that. Okay, great. So let's get right down to business. I would love a brief report back, facilitators. So I'm just going to start with group number 1, whoever that was.
I think that was me. I don't remember the number. I'm pretty sure I saw one on my screen.
That's valid. Okay, yeah, I'll just call on the facilitators because I know who they are. Yes, please. Kim, you go first.
No problem. And I just want to say that we ran out of time, but Ronald was in my group and he had a number of great questions. So Ronald, I did not forget about you. When we get to the Q&A, I will be sure to answer some of those, or you can ask them to the larger group. So my group was great. We only got through one of the kind of scenarios, but it went really well. Our group remembered to reference the bill. They remembered to identify themselves as constituents. They were able to introduce themselves. They were very on the money when it came to talking points. And they also made sure to identify themselves as constituents. So overall, really great. And I'm excited to see you all lobby at our lobby day, and any other issues that you care about, I think you will at least be relatively prepared, and you can reference this presentation and also some of the materials to make sure that you can advocate on behalf of the things you care about. So really great job in my group.
Awesome. Great job, group 1. Thank you so much, Kim, for facilitating. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go to the next person in my grid, Stacy.
Yeah, hi. So I was the facilitator for group 2. Everyone in my group did a really great job. Things that I thought everyone did really well was sharing their personal story and their background as to why they were here today, showing up to try and pass climate legislation. We had some good talking points about, you know, why Virginia needs clean cars, as well as we practiced some scenarios with how to respond when your legislator gives you that rebuttal, you know, and they're trying to make you sell this bill and sell your talking points. So yeah, I don't think any questions came up in my group, but for anyone who's in my group, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to answer those.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacy. I really appreciate you acting as facilitator. Bridget.
Hi. So in my group, we were lacking some of the actual talking points surrounding each specific bill, but even without those, I think that a lot of my group were very successful in talking about their personal stories. We had Lori that was on that gave a message about her brother needing to use the bus, but not being able to even get to a place where buses are. And so that sort of stuff is obviously really important because you can't be spending $25 a day on a taxi just to get to where a bus is to go somewhere else. In addition, we also had Doug that was there, and he would like to get an EV, but he is not able to because financially it's just not, doable right now. So obviously passing some of these laws in Virginia, like clean car standards, would give him more of an ability to do that, along with the EV incentives bill. And then we also had Wyatt on, which was very helpful as he is more of a master in clean cars than I am. So he was able to really help out and answer a lot of the questions and give better talking points to everyone. So no main questions, but if anyone from my group does have any, feel free to put those in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. And thank you, Wyatt, for pitching in as well. And then Roz.
Yeah, I think it went very well. I think most of the conversation around supporting the legislation were based on personal stories. Of course, we had Beth, who's a former teacher, and then Richard Shingle and Richard Sebastian, who Richard Sebastian had a 10-year-old son riding the school bus, and I'm going to go through the questions, and in the meantime, if folks have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box. First question I have is from Cheryl Johnson, asks, what if your delegate does not do any social media, much less than Zoom? Kim, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, absolutely, Roz. Thank you for that question. And who did you say asked that question?
Cheryl Johnson.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Cheryl. I think the short answer here is you're probably going to have to revert to the old-fashioned way of sending an email or making a phone call. I would probably prioritize email. I did one of these events with some legislative staff at the start of December, and one thing that they emphasized was that anytime they get an email, if you're talking about a specific bill, they enter that into their database. I don't know what it's called, but I know it exists. They enter that information with your name, your position, where you live, and so the legislators are able to see that information. So I would definitely encourage you, even if it's not a one-on-one lobbying meeting, you are able to contact them via email. It's effective, it's efficient, so definitely don't be discouraged by the inability to get a Zoom meeting or find those folks on social media.
Thank you, Kim. Next question we have is from Glenda Booth, asks, how do we find out when a hearing is scheduled? Chris, would you like to answer that?
Sure. If you want to know when a hearing is going to be scheduled regarding a specific bill, a really good way to do that is to create a profile on Lobbyists in a Box and to track it. The other thing that you can do to figure out when a bill is coming up for a hearing is to look at the House committee schedule and the Senate committee schedule. And a little trick of the trade is that given that everything has to be heard before crossover on February 6th, there's only a handful of slots that any given committee is ever going to meet. So one thing that we used to do when I was a staffer in Senator Evans' office is we would coordinate with amazing witnesses like Glenda Booth and the Friends of Dyke Marsh, and we would go ahead and we would say, hey, please hold, please hold 9 a.m. on a Thursday for the next 3 Thursdays and keep an eye on it. And then really, and then making sure that and the legislative office would reach out. So the best thing is to have someone in your group be tracking the legislation so that they can see when it comes up. But at this point in time, you can go ahead and you can look at when those committees are scheduled to meet, so that you're not completely caught off guard when you get notice 48 to 24 hours before a bill comes up that you're going to need to speak on it.
And I'll just add that I just dropped a link where you can see the meeting scheduled. It does require you to kind of go in there the night before, look at what's on the agenda for the next day, and then you can click on those specific committees and see what which bills are on their docket. Like I said, it does take some legwork, but it's a quick and easy way to see what's coming up the next day or the next couple of days. So that is a great resource.
Thank you both. We have received a number of good questions from someone who's joined us, and unfortunately don't know your name. You're logged in under iPad. I don't want to call a question from iPad, certainly. But the question is there an EJ coalition that meets monthly in Virginia? Not a specific organization, but a space of all organizations who choose to participate. I'm not sure who would like to answer this question.
Yeah, I can answer that question, Roz. So I will say that as kind of environmental groups, we do have a regular ongoing meeting, and it's every week instead of every month, of what's called the Environmental Justice Collaborative. It is kind of limited to existing organizations, and I don't know of a space like that for citizens or just advocates that are interested in that work. But there is a space for those of us who work in the environmental community to speak regularly about legislation, about certain permitting issues, about projects that are moving forward. So that work is being done, and is being done by a great group of folks from CCAN, from the Virginia Sierra Club, from folks that work with New Virginia Majority and others. So that work is definitely being done.
Thank you, Kim. And then another question: what organization and legislator are taking the lead on the Clean Car Initiative? I think this was answered during Chris's part on transit modernization study, if I'm not mistaken.
The Advanced Clean Car Standard Bill is being carried by Delegate Bagby. That's HB 1965.
Thank you.
And there is a broad coalition of folks working on that legislation in terms of groups. Chris and myself are working really closely, as well as BCN and other organizations. So if you want to follow it, I know that there is a petition live on our website as well as Virginia LCB's, and you will be able to find information there.
Thank you. Beth McKenzie Moore, if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, asks which bill is pushing for electrification of school buses? And she adds, good for my senator, she's on school committees.
So that is going to be Delegate Keem's legislation, and I'll drop the bill number in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see. I think this is it. I think we answered all the questions. Maybe one last question. And again, iPad under iPad login name asks, who's putting this out in low-income communities, and where can we find this info? I think this was shared. My apologies. I think this was answered earlier when Chris was covering the covering his part. Do folks have any more questions? All right.
Yeah, and Roz, I just want to expand on that last question, as specifically because this is part of what Ronald was asking in our group as well. So I just want to say that, you know, as environmental groups, we have limited resources in capacity, and in an ideal world, right, we'd be able to be doing this work in person. One of our priorities at CCAN and CCAN Action Fund is to really be thinking about how to lower barriers to folks getting education and information. But by way of this virtual world, we are a little limited in what we can do. We have been emphasizing really just doing education events. So last month we did a Clean Cars question and answer session where we just answered really like basic questions that people may like before we ask people to get involved with legislation or to advocate on behalf of these things. We were just trying to answer questions about how far can electric vehicles go, where would we charge them? And so we're going to be continuing to do that work around our policy issues moving forward. We're going to try to set up a regular schedule of events to make sure that folks are able to access those at least during this virtual setting. And then when we are able to meet in person, we're going to be rethinking where we host those events. So obviously, there are some barriers if people don't have access to internet or access to a computer to join these events. But when we're able to do them in person, we're going to be making sure to go to those communities and provide them the same learning opportunities. So that is just a short answer around that. But if anyone has other questions about that kind of concern around the people that we are reaching, feel free to ask those.
Thank you, Kim. I think one last question, and then I'll turn it back to Lauren. Mackenzie has followed up and asks, who do you contact about the bill for EV incentives considering low-income communities? Reed or my rep?
Mackenzie, is it possible to, or Beth, is it possible to expand on that question? Would you be comfortable asking it to the group? I just want to get some clarification, and then I think we can get you the answer here.
Well, it came out in our, this is Beth. It came out in our breakout, and another fellow that was with us, Mr. Shingles, he's from Southwest Virginia near Blacksburg, and he was talking about how low-income people would not be able to get EV cars and so on, and talking about how poor they were. Well, I brought up the idea of the rebates that Reed was talking about. Is that correct in his EV bill? Incentives bill about rebates for low and moderate income?
That's correct. Delegate Reed is carrying HB 1979. And right. An important thing to emphasize with this rebate is that it applies not only to new vehicles, which right now are on average, all vehicles are starting at like almost $40,000. This also applies to new, it also applies to used and to leased vehicles. The standard rebate is $2,500, and the program has an aggressive enhanced rebate for low and moderate income communities. This is an additional $2,000. So if you qualify for LMI, and I don't know what the levels are for that, but you would be eligible for $4,500 in rebates as opposed to the $2,500, which is wonderful because this lowers the barrier for folks to get into an electric vehicle, which then has a lower life cycle cost. So, so that when it comes to repairs and when it comes to fueling their vehicle, they're able to realize those long-term savings that helps them like enhance their economic stability as well.
Well, my point is that I came up with this point, and Mr. Shingles nodded his head with the agreement because I worked with disenfranchised students, is that coming up with the money up front for this is more difficult for the lower income people. And rebates is not as easy to do for them as upfront help.
So you raise an incredibly important point, and that's where we need to make sure that we are talking about this as an on-the-hood rebate. That's the term of art, or at least that's what the automobile dealer lobbyist calls it. And that means that you show up and I sell you a used electric vehicle for $10,000. You know, you're eligible, that vehicle might sell to Roz for $1,450, but because you're low, moderate income, because you qualify as a low to moderate income Virginian, you get $4,500 off at the start, at the outset.
Okay.
Rather than as a tax credit as some other packages do.
Right. That would so during the sale, that rebate's already taken off. That's what you're saying for the low income.
And
okay.
that's important also because that's a way it's not only good for the buyer, but it's good for the seller as well. So we get by incentivizing these on the hood as opposed to tax credit style rebates, you're able to serve more people more easily, and the buying process isn't as hampered by trying to manage it through a tax credit.
I guess maybe, I don't know how the bill is written. I was just saying that if it was written so it's out front, that it's that way, rather than saying rebate, because rebate means that later on. And so we just have to be knowledgeable enough to tell the rep, but at the same time, when they're reading the bill, they may not get that on their own. So, okay. I got you. Thank you.
Two quick questions, if I could.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have 5 minutes. I just wanted to put this out there for folks. If we can make it quick, that would be fantastic.
Very quickly, I'd like to know if this presentation, the PowerPoints, will be emailed out to everyone on the call. And secondly, as the taking on the community engagement, as you look at advocacy organizations around the country, such as CCAN, and many of these organizations don't have the funding, is there anything in this transportation bill or settlement with VW to put money in community engagement for advocacy groups, as well as spending money with African-American owned media? Because you can talk these Zoom calls all the time. This information is not reaching those communities that's being disproportionately affected by this.
So, Anna, thank you for that point. As far as what the flexibility is regarding the VW settlement funds, that is something that the call organizers are going to have to get back to you on. That question goes deeper than I think we're going to be able to answer here today in the next 4 minutes. As to making sure that advocacy organizations, when it comes to the environment, are reaching across Virginia's various communities, talking to groups across the Commonwealth and across the socioeconomic spectrum, and speaking to people of different races, religions, making sure that the organization is investing in those outreach efforts is important. And that's actually something Roz, I want to punt this really quick to Roz and Bridget, because there are regional coordinators at LCV, and that is something we've actually been working to expand in the last few years, and has been a large effort to have regional representation that is able to speak to various communities throughout the Commonwealth. But like I said, they can speak to that a little bit better than I can on the inside the building lobbying side.
I'm just wondering if it's possible to address the issues that may be raised by the Virginia Car Dealers Association in terms of their contributions to delegates and senators, and also their interest in maintaining the service regime of gas-powered cars.
Yeah, Fredericks, I will start kind of answering that question. And I will say that what we've heard from the dealers is that they want to be able to sell electric vehicles and sell them efficiently. So we're going to take that at face value here, right? The main thing that they've been saying is that they want to make sure that we have incentives and that we have the charging infrastructure. One thing to note with this bill is that there is a 2-year waiting period. So we have a 2-year waiting period to think through some of these components, whether it be charging infrastructure or rebates. We already have some of that legislation in place, as we've spoken to throughout this session. So in my eyes, we are on the same page when it comes to incentivizing electric vehicles and making sure that we have the infrastructure. But the reality is, when it comes to charging infrastructure, we are well on our way. We have the VW settlement, which Chris spoke to, that is providing infrastructure throughout the Commonwealth. And then we have the partnership with EVgo, and their projections say that within 3 years, about 90% of Virginians will be within 30 minutes, I think it is, of a fast charger. So that's good news for us, because by the time this legislation comes into play, most Virginians will have quick access to charging infrastructure. And then another thing just to remember is that you're also able to charge at a standard outlet. It will take longer, and obviously fast chargers are the most ideal option. But if you hear those arguments, just rest assured that we're thinking about that as well, and that we are well on our way to making sure that Virginians have access to fast chargers.
Hey, sorry, I was having some technical difficulties here, unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Kim, Chris, and of course, everyone for joining us today. Before we end, I would like to turn it over to Lauren. She has some good news to share with you all about an upcoming event. Lauren?
Sure. So really quickly, Roz has already put in the information about upcoming lobby days. The links are in the chat box further up above. You can get more information or ask for those links again from any of us working at CCAN or LCB. Again, our email addresses are all further up in the chat. And then additionally, CCAN does have a written advocacy action team. It meets every other Monday night from 6 to 7, where we work with volunteers and activists, and we all work on producing pieces of written content, LTEs, blog posts, op-eds, advocating for lots of different issues that we're passionate about. Please join us if this is something that you're interested in or would just like to learn about more. Again, email Elle or I. We're both our first name at ChesapeakeClimate.org, Lauren and Elle. Thank you so much for everything, and I'm going to turn it over to Elle to end us all now.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here and taking the time out of your day to spend it with us. There will be a follow-up email that'll be coming out very shortly. That'll include the recording, all of the slides, all of the action materials, because I know that some folks did not get their EV packets, so that will for sure be out to you as well. So just be on the lookout for that in your email. But otherwise, thank you again so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week and hopefully the week after that to continue to lobby for this sort of change. Bye, all.
Thank you.